My name is Ezekiel Josiah Tanner. One was born on the 12th day of March, 1849, in Athens County, Ohio. That makes me 83 years old now, and I'm telling you this because I don't know how much longer I have to tell it. I want to talk about my father, Amos Nathaniel Tanner, a blacksmith, a dreamer, a man I barely knew and spent my whole life trying to understand. Now, here's the thing about memory when you're my age. You start to wonder what's real and what's just. Stories you've been told so many times, they feel like your own. My mother, Cordelia, she talked about my father constantly. Every night, it seemed, she'd tell me something. The way he laughed, the way he could bend iron like it was nothing, the way he'd sing hymns off key while he worked. I heard those stories so many times that I can almost see him. Almost. But here's what I know is mine. What I know came from me, not from her. I remember heat, the heat of a forge. And I remember the smell of leather and smoke and sweat, all mixed together into something that, even now, if I catch a whiff of a blacksmith's shop, well, it stops me cold. I was just a baby, 5 months old maybe, when he left. So I shouldn't remember anything at all, but I swear to you, I remember being held. I remember looking up at a face, a big face, dark from soot, and feeling safe. That's all. Just safe. My mother said he used to hold me over his shoulder and walk around the shop, showing me the tools like I could understand. She said he'd whisper things to me. Plans. Dreams. She said he told me once, "You're gonna have land, boy. Real land. Not this little scrap we got now." That was the thing about my father, you see. He was a good blacksmith. People came from 3 counties to have him shoe their horses, fix their wagon wheels. But it wasn't enough for him. He looked at the hills around Athens, and he saw walls. He looked at the forge, and he saw a cage. And when the news came about California, about gold just lying in the rivers, waiting to be picked up, well, I think something in him broke loose. Or maybe it finally came together. I don't know which. 1849, the year I was born, the year everything changed. They called it the rush, and that's exactly what it was. Men rushing away from their lives. Rushing towards something that most of them never found. My father was one of those men. He left in August of 1849. I was 5 months old. My mother told me the story so many times I can see it like I was there, standing in the doorway, watching him go. But of course I wasn't. I was in her arms, too young to know that the man walking down that dirt road with a pack on his back was walking out of my life forever. He didn't go alone. Our neighbor, Orville Desmond Creech, went with him. Orville was a farmer, a quiet man with a wife and 3 children of his own. He and my father had grown up together, fished the same creeks, courted girls at the same church socials. When my father decided to go to California, Orville said he'd go too. Safety in numbers, they figured. 2 men from Ohio against whatever the frontier had waiting. My mother begged my father to stay. She told me that years later, when I was old enough to understand, she said she got down on her knees and begged. But he had that look in his eyes, she said, that faraway look. He wasn't seeing her anymore. He was seeing gold rivers and new land, in a future that didn't include a cramped little forge, in a town that was never going to be anything more than it already was. He kissed her. He kissed me. And he promised. He said, 2 years, Delia. 3 at the most. I'll come back with enough money to buy the whole county. She said he smiled when he said it, like he really believed it. The first letter came in October of that same year. It was postmarked from Independence, Missouri. That was where the wagon trains gathered before heading west. My mother kept that letter until the day she died. I still have it now, in a box in the other room. The paper's so brittle you can barely touch it without pieces flaking off, but I can still read his handwriting. He wrote about the excitement and independence, all the men and wagons and mules, the noise and the dust, and the sense that something big was happening. He wrote that he and Orval had joined up with a party of 32 men, all headed for California together. He wrote that he missed us already, but that this was the right thing. He was sure of it. He signed it, "Your loving husband, Amos." My mother read that letter to me so many times when I was a boy that I memorized it without trying. The second letter came in early 1850. This one was from Fort Laramie, up in Wyoming Territory. It was shorter. The tone was different. He didn't write about excitement anymore. He wrote about dust storms and bad water, and 2 men in their party who had died of cholera. He wrote that the journey was harder than he expected, but that they were more than halfway there. He wrote that he thought about us every night before he fell asleep. He asked my mother to kiss me for him. And then, nothing. Months passed. A year. 2 years. My mother wrote letters back, sent them to every address she could think of, every mining camp she heard about, every post office in California. None of them were ever answered. She went to the post office in Athens every single week, year after year, asking if anything had come. The postmaster, a man named Hewitt, he knew her by name, knew her story. After a while, he'd just shake his head when he saw her coming. Didn't even have to ask anymore. She never stopped going. Not until she couldn't walk anymore. And then, in the spring of 1852, Orville Creech came home. I remember the day Orville came back. I was almost 3 years old by then, and this memory is mine, not my mother's. I remember standing on our porch, holding on to her skirt, and watching a man walk up the road toward our house. He was thin, so thin that his clothes hung off him like they belonged to someone else. His face was brown and cracked from sun, and his eyes. I remembered his eyes. They looked empty, like someone had scooped out whatever used to be inside them and left just the shell. My mother made a sound when she saw him. Not a scream, not a word. Just a sound, like something between a gasp and a moan. She knew. Before he even got close enough to speak, she knew. Because Orville Creech was alone. She asked him. I don't remember the exact words, but I remember her voice. High and tight and shaking. She asked him where Amos was. And Orville just stood there in our yard, swaying a little like the wind might knock him over, and he shook his head. That's all. He shook his head. My mother asked again, louder this time, and he said, I can't, Cordelia. I can't talk about it. I'm sorry. And then he walked away, walked back to his own farm, to his own wife and children, and he never came to our house again. My mother sent me to ask him things over the years, but he always turned me away. Whatever happened out there on the trail, whatever he saw or did or failed to do, he buried it so deep that not even whiskey could dig it out. And believe me, he tried. Orville Creech drank himself half to death over the next decade. Everybody in Athens knew why. Growing up without a father is one thing. Plenty of boys in that time grew up without fathers. War took some. Disease took others. Accidents on farms, in mines, on rivers. Death was common, and widows were common, and orphans were common. But I wasn't any of those things. My father wasn't dead, not officially, not confirmed. He was just gone, and that made me something else entirely, something that didn't have a name. The other boys in town, they'd ask me about it sometimes. Where's your pa? And I never knew what to say. If I said he was dead, I'd be lying, and my mother would have taken a switch to me for it. If I said he went to California, they'd ask if he was coming back, and I'd have to say, I didn't know. After a while, I just stopped answering. Let them think whatever they wanted. My grandfather, Reverend Tobias Tanner, he had his own ideas about what happened. He was a Methodist preacher, stern as a hickory stick, and he believed my father's leaving was a sin. Abandonment of family. Pursuit of worldly treasure instead of spiritual grace. He never said it directly to my face, but I heard him say it to others. Heard him preach about it, even in sermons that everybody in the congregation knew were about Amos. The love of money is the root of all evil. He'd thunder from the pulpit, and I'd sit there in the pew next to my mother, feeling the eyes of the whole town on the back of my neck. My mother never said a word against the Reverend. She just sat there, spine straight, face like stone, and when the service was over, she'd take my hand and walk me home without speaking. She was stronger than anyone I ever knew, my mother. She had to be. She worked as a seamstress to keep us fed, took in mending, made dresses for the women in town, did alterations for the general store. Her fingers were always pricked and calloused, always moving, even when she was sitting still. She never remarried. Men asked. I know they did, because I heard the whispers, heard the offers made through intermediaries, through my grandfather even. But she refused everyone. She said she was still married. She said until someone brought her proof that Amos was dead, she was Amos Tanner's wife, and that was the end of it. She kept those 2 letters in a tin box under her bed. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear her open that box, hear the rustle of paper. I never saw her cry, not once in all my years living under her roof. But I heard her, some nights, through the thin walls. Heard her talking to him like he was there, like he could hear her. When I was 12 years old, I decided I was going to find out what happened. Orville Creech was still alive then, though barely. He'd lost his farm, lost his family. His wife had taken the children and gone to live with her sister in Pennsylvania. He was living alone in a shack at the edge of town, drinking whatever rotgut he could afford. I went to see him one autumn afternoon, walked right up to his door and knocked. He opened it and looked at me with those hollow eyes, and I said, Mr. Creech, I'm Ezekiel Tanner, Amos Tanner's son, and I need to know what happened to my father. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh that sounds like crying. He let me in. His shack smelled like sour whiskey and unwashed clothes. He sat me down at a little table and poured himself a drink and didn't offer me anything, which was fine, because I wouldn't have taken it anyway. And then slowly, in bits and pieces, he started to talk. He told me about the journey west, the heat, the dust, the endless walking. He told me about men dying of cholera, of thirst, of accidents with guns and wagons. He told me about the desert, somewhere in Nevada Territory, a place called Humboldt Sink, where the water was poison and the ground was white with salt. He told me that's where everything fell apart. There was a fight, he said, a fight over water, over which route to take, over who was in charge. The party of 32 men split into smaller groups. Some went north, some went south, and my father, Orville's voice broke when he got to this part. He said, your daddy went with a group heading south. I went north. That's the last I saw of him, standing there in that white desert, waving goodbye. He said he made it to California eventually. Spent 2 years there, found no gold worth mentioning, caught fever twice, and finally gave up and came home. He said he asked about Amos everywhere he went. Asked at every mining camp, every trading post, every saloon. Nobody knew anything. Or if they did, they weren't saying. He looked at me with tears running down his ruined face and said, I'm sorry, boy. I should have stayed with him. I should have gone south too. He died the next year, winter of 1863. Took his secrets with him, all except that one. For years after that conversation with Orville, I tried to put it behind me. I grew up. I learned a trade. I became a carpenter, not a blacksmith. I couldn't bring myself to work with iron, couldn't stand the smell of the forge. I met a woman named Minnie Pearl Atkins at a church social in 1870, and we married the following spring. She was kind and patient, and she understood somehow about the hole in my life where a father should have been. We had 2 children, a boy and a girl, and I worked hard to give them the things I never had. Stability, presence, a father who came home every night. I told myself that was enough, that the past was the past, and there was no point in digging up old bones. And then, in the autumn of 1876, a letter arrived that changed everything. It came from Sacramento, California. The return address said, S.B. Whitley. I didn't know anyone by that name. I almost threw it away, thought it was some kind of mistake or maybe a swindle. But something made me open it. Inside was a single page, written in a shaky hand, and it said this, Dear Sir, I am writing to inquire if you are the son of Amos Nathaniel Tanner, formerly of Athens, Ohio. If so, I have information regarding your father that I believe you would want to know. I am an old man now, and not long for this world, and I feel I must unburden myself before I meet my Maker. Please write back at your earliest convenience. Yours respectfully, Silas Beaumont Whitley. I must have read that letter 20 times. My hands were shaking so badly that Minnie asked if I was ill. I showed it to her, and she read it, and she looked at me with those soft brown eyes and said, You have to go. I said, California is 3,000 miles away. And she said, Zeke, you've been waiting your whole life for this. Go. So I went. It took me 3 weeks to get there. The Transcontinental Railroad had been finished for 7 years by then, so at least I didn't have to walk like my father did. But even by train, it was the longest journey of my life. I watched the country roll past my window, the green hills of Ohio giving way to the flat plains of the Midwest, then the mountains, then the desert, that same desert where my father had disappeared 27 years before. When we crossed through Nevada, I pressed my face to the glass and tried to imagine him out there, walking through that emptiness, and I felt something twist in my chest that I couldn't name. Sacramento was bigger than I expected, louder, full of people who had come from everywhere, chasing the same dream my father had chased. I found Silas Whitley living in a boarding house near the river. He was old, older than my mother, with white hair and hands that trembled constantly, and eyes that had seen too much. When I told him who I was, he started to cry, just sat there in his little room and wept like a child. When he finally composed himself, he told me his story. He said he had worked the mines near Placerville in 1851, and that's where he met a man named Amos Tanner, a blacksmith from Ohio. Big man, he said, strong, had a scar on his chin from a piece of hot iron that flew up and caught him years before. My heart nearly stopped when he said that. My mother had told me about that scar. It was real. This was real. Whitley said my father worked at the mine for about a year, shoeing horses and fixing equipment. Said he talked about his family back in Ohio all the time. Talked about his wife, Cordelia. Talked about his baby son, Ezekiel. Say he was saving money to go home. But then, in the winter of 1852, there was an outbreak of typhoid fever in the camp. Dozens of men died. My father was one of them. Whitley said they buried the dead in a mass grave outside the camp. No markers, no names, just a pit in the ground. He said, I'm sorry, son. There's no way to know exactly where he lies. I sat there in that little room, 3,000 miles from home, and I didn't know what to feel. Relief that I finally knew? Grief that it was over? Anger that it took 27 years for someone to tell me? All of it, I suppose. All of it at once. But then Whitley reached into a drawer and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. He set it on the table between us and unwrapped it slowly, and inside was a hunting knife. The handle was worn. The blade was tarnished, but carved into the handle were 3 letters. A.N.T. Amos Nathaniel Tanner. Whitley said he won it in a card game years ago, from a man who claimed he'd taken it off a body in a mining camp. He said he didn't know whose knife it was until he heard the name and started asking questions. He said, "I think this belongs to you now." I picked up that knife, my father's knife, and I held it in my hands for the first time. The only thing left of him in the whole world. I couldn't speak. I just sat there, holding it, feeling the weight of it, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I heard my mother's voice telling me about the man who used to carry me around his forge, showing me the tools, making plans for a future that never came. I took the train back to Ohio with that knife in my coat pocket. I kept reaching in to touch it, just to make sure it was still there, that I hadn't dreamed the whole thing. 3 weeks there, 3 weeks back, and the whole time I was thinking about what I was going to say to my mother. How do you tell someone that the person they've been waiting for almost 30 years, is never coming home? That there's no grave to visit, no headstone to lay flowers on, just a pit in the California dirt with no name on it? I didn't know if the news would break her or set her free. Maybe both. When I got home, I went straight to her house. She was 68 years old by then, still living in the same little place where I grew up, still taking in mending, even though her eyes were going bad and her fingers were stiff with arthritis. I sat her down at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd read me my father's letters when I was a boy, and I told her everything. Silas Whitley, the mining camp, the typhoid fever, the mass grave. She listened without interrupting, her face still as water, and when I was done, she didn't say anything for a long time. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out the knife and set it on the table in front of her. She looked at it. She reached out and touched those 3 letters carved into the handle. And then she said something I'll never forget as long as I live. She said, "Then he didn't forget us. He just couldn't come back. That was all. No tears, no wailing. Just that quiet understanding, that final peace." She picked up the knife and held it the way you'd hold a baby, gentle and close. And she sat there with it for a long time while I watched. She died 3 years later, in 1879. She never wore black, not even at the end. She said she didn't need to mourn him anymore. She knew where he was. She knew he'd tried. I've kept that knife for 56 years now. It's in the drawer right there, next to my chair. Sometimes I take it out and hold it, the way she did, and I think about all the things my father never got to see. My wedding, my children, my grandchildren, the man I became. He missed all of it. He missed everything. And I know I'm not the only one. There were thousands of men who went to California in 1849 and never came home. Thousands of wives who waited. Thousands of children who grew up asking the same question I asked. Where's my father? Most of them never got an answer. I was lucky, I suppose. I got a knife and a story and a place to imagine, even if I'll never see it. That's more than most. I'm 83 years old now. I don't know how many more years I have, if any. That's why I'm telling this. Because when I'm gone, there won't be anyone left who remembers Amos Tanner. My children never knew him. My grandchildren never heard his name until today. But he was real. He lived. He loved my mother and he loved me. And he walked into that desert believing he was going to make our lives better. He was wrong, but he wasn't a bad man. He was just a man, caught up in something bigger than himself, chasing a dream that turned out to be a lie I don't blame him anymore. I stopped blaming him a long time ago. I just wish, well, I wish I could have known him. I wish I had more than one memory and a knife and 2 old letters falling apart in a tin box. But that's what I have. And now you have it too.